Good morning. I also wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we meet this morning, the Turrbal and Yagara, and recognise that these have always been lands of art, culture, knowledge and learning. So welcome. Thank you. This is an extraordinary panel, and the wisdom and knowledge amongst these three people is quite extraordinary. So it's going to be an interesting discussion. And I really wanted to start off with putting some context and asking David and Joanna how they first met Anne. So, David, can you tell us a bit of the backstory of how you know Anne and that connection?
Well, I should have known Anne when we were both at school because we were pretty much in the same year. But I actually met Anne through her husband, Robert Walker, who was a photographer. And that would have been about 45 years ago, Anne?
Don't ask me hard questions.
No, it would have been when I came back to Australia first from England in the late 60s, early 70s.
So, yes, we were about what age then?
Oh,
But
40 or something like that.
Oh, really?
Or maybe... time passes. That's when we would have met. In Sydney, yeah.
In Sydney. So you didn't know each other here in Brisbane?
No, we met in Sydney.
No.
Interesting. Yeah.
We, as I say, we were at school together at the same time, but didn't actually meet, although I knew several girls in Anne's class.
And Joanna, when did you first meet Anne?
I met Anne fairly shortly after I arrived in Australia in 1978 or 9.
Yeah.
And I remember very well having dinner with Anne in your house and being very impressed by your sort of the way you managed your children, who were very little then, and producing dinner, and then also your marvellous paintings. Yeah, I remember that very well indeed.
I can't produce dinner so well anymore.
Oh, I'm sure you do. I don't know. Yes, you do.
So, Anne, just going back to what David said, and you know, when you were at Somerville House and the extraordinary, I suppose, the heritage and the teachers that were actually at that school and what you had exposure to. So, Betty Churchill was one of your teachers. Can you just talk a little bit about that and maybe how that really provided a grounding for you to go on to pursue a arts practice?
I think I was really lucky to go to Somerville House when I did. And I went in the primary school. I must have been about 10 or 11, and we had an art class which I'd never really come across before at the primary schools, and Miss Caroline Barker. Oh, by the way, all the teachers at Somerville House were practising women artists. There's Caroline Barker, Betty Churcher, Pat Prentice, and June Meek. Anyway, it was just a wonderful school for art. So sometimes an artist can have just a very lucky thing that can help them on their way, and that was mine. And Miss Barker put up a still life, and I painted it. And I just something changed for me then. I was an artist. Yeah.
Can I just add something to that?
Yes.
It's always a rare thing to see which of the girls' schools in any city goes on producing extraordinary people. I mean, I noticed it not just in Brisbane, but particularly in Adelaide. And Somerville House was the girls' school in Brisbane that produced people in every area. And it was because they were told from the beginning that they could do anything that a man could do. And that was quite rare in those days.
Yes, and it did help somewhat. To be, yes, yeah.
And when you were 9, Anne, you were sent off to art classes. That was with When the
Yes,
schools
oh.
closed down during the war?
Yes,
Yeah.
the school closed down because of the war, and we had to be occupied. So we went to somebody's house, and she set up a still life. I mean, it was just so. It's like that thing, you see the light. You know, there's just something that that's what I can do, and because I'd been particularly fond of just dreaming, I think, and not really getting on with what you would call an academic life, but I had something happening that I was able to build on, and
Yeah,
that was being an artist and being creative.
It's extraordinary to speak to artists and creative people in that moment that they had decided that's what they wanted to do, and it's a really strong memory for so many people that I speak to. What I'm interested in, David, when you had kind of, you know, that moment, that spark that you wanted to become a writer and a poet. Can you recall a particular moment in your past?
Well, look, I had a rather strange movement towards that because although when I was, say, 10, 11, 12, I was a musician and I took music very seriously and I wanted to be a composer. And then after that, I decided I wanted to be an actor. And in both those cases, I was trained. And really, writing was something that I did. I mean, I won a very, very important literary prize at Grammar when I was 13. But I didn't necessarily think of that as meaning that I was going to be a writer. So I think I found my way to it slowly. And I don't know that I considered writing as being my major interest in the arts until I was probably early years at university.
May I add something to that? I think we were both born as creative people, and I think that can cover music, theatre, poetry, dance, the arts, painting, and so it's all a creative nature that we have. And I remember walking up to the local music teacher when I was about 5 and demanding lessons, but then I wasn't really encouraged to do those things, but it was all there, you know, and art became the thing.
Yeah, the thing about writing, of course, is that you come to it and you don't know that that's what you're training for. Most other arts are crafts, and you have to learn that craft, and it's really quite difficult. And writing is not like that at all. I was a great reader, and I think that prepared me to be a writer. But the most important thing, my training as a writer, that was most valuable to me was that I was a very curious child and a great eavesdropper. And I look back on that and say that I actually started my training to be a writer when I was about 3 or 4, when I learned always to linger in a room a little longer than my parents wanted me to be there. And I used to hide behind doors and listen. And that was my original training as a writer.
Fabulous. I think while we're on the topic, because I'm quite interested in Terence Maloon, who's written extensively on Ann's practice. He says that some of her paintings can be read as sequences of dance steps, while at the same time they strongly suggest an embryonic landscape or seascapes. And I started thinking about music with your work, and you know, the many descriptions how it is a very intuitive process. And I'm just wondering, do you listen to music while you're painting, or do you paint in silence?
I turn the music on when I go to the studio, and then when I feel that something is beginning in the painting, I just automatically go and turn it off, because I'm now in that space and I don't want to be in any other space.
So it helps you go into that space of painting.
maybe. It's not that it helps, it's just that it doesn't help when I'm there.
Yeah. And what, is it classical music that you listen to, or just
Yes.
yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And I go to concerts and, you know, things, but I love music, yeah.
yeah, that's great. I just, Joanna, when you first met Anne in the late 70s and you saw her work, what really took you when you saw it? Because she was producing quite extraordinary work that stood out from that current trend in Australian art during the 70s, and a very male-dominated. So coming out as a fresh person to Australia.
Well, to begin with, I didn't know very much about Australian art when I came here. And secondly, I don't ever think I look at art as being painted by a woman or a man. I look at art as a painting. I mean, I look at paintings as paintings. Who's actually painted them, I think, it doesn't matter. And so you either react to them or you don't. And I liked the way Anne painted. They spoke to me. And I think that engaged my curiosity, and I wanted to know more about them and to look at more of her work. But and again, I didn't sort of necessarily think of it as being Australian art or somebody else's art or something else. It was just art that I liked, and that, as I say, was how I look at art.
During that time in the 1970s, Anne, you started painting the flight machines, and can you tell us a little bit about that, or that motif that comes up throughout your work?
I don't know how it arrived. I think it's just to do with imagination and wanting to make something new. I think I can't think that I was copying anyone else who was doing that at the time. But was I? I don't know. Can you think?
No, I don't think so. I really don't.
Sorry.
No.
I think it's just to do with releasing one's imagination and feeling free to do so, and I was it was just something that I had to do, and I had to be able to look at, and in a way, I think that's the way I paint for myself, so I can look at it, and that's why it's good to look at these again, because they haven't been seen for a while, and they've been. Mike found them and was quite excited to see them, because he doesn't go back that far, probably, so young. And but I loved doing these paintings and seeing them arrive. And at the same time, I would often make things too that were three-dimensional. So I hope that three-dimensional quality comes into my painting.
Yeah, there's the search for this spatial quality throughout your work, and I know that, David, you talk about this. I've read some pieces that you have written about the unique spatial awareness that comes to people that live in Brisbane, and the hilly terrain. And I know your work has been described in terms of a fairly, unique spatial quality that it evokes. Did you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of Anne's work, that her search for this unique, capturing that sense of being in space?
Oh, look, I think that how you experience space, especially as a child, does also shape the way you read the world. That's often, I see it as being the fact that you are used to walking to the top of a hill, as you do in Brisbane, and seeing things from an entirely different perspective. And so what develops in you is the notion of that becomes your way of thinking, not what can I see here, but how would this look from a different point of view. And I can see that at work in all sorts of things. I'm not sure that I could isolate that in Ann's work. I think that one of the things we see here, which is different from what Ann's doing later, is that most of these works are still, in terms of dimension, flat. And what Ann goes on to do, and which is the real growth area of her painting, is to explore the possible depths in the canvas. That is, it's not perspective because it's abstract, but nevertheless it's interested in looking at different levels of existence, rather the way in which you look at the sky and see clouds and then something behind that and something behind that. And most of these works have not yet moved into that kind of area. So they're sort of, Ann's painting makes a huge development in that area a little after this.
There's something very subterranean about them, layered, isn't there, those works from the 80s?
Well, I think once she's freed herself of line, which is these pictures we see here are still very much interested in line. Once she frees herself of line and the paintings become more abstract and the whole of the canvas is used, then she's interested in the depths of the canvas and the depths of the paintings. Is that understandable?
That's an illusion, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so you're playing with something else that's to do with not looking and at something and painting it. It's that illusion of an object.
Yeah. Well, the later works become three-dimensional.
Yes.
And that's very, very interesting, and that allows you to do all sorts of interesting things within the square or whatever it is of the canvas. The thing that I'm most impressed by in what we see on the walls here is that the fact that the paintings are so full of exuberance, and that is something that is always there in Ann's paintings. I mean, it's interesting, last night we heard of, say, Molvig. Molvig is mostly gloomy and self-regarding, and there's none of that in Ann's painting anywhere. There's a kind of joyousness and lyrical excitement about the poems, about the paintings, which is not self-regarding.
Yes, there's definitely a very strong palette in Anne's work early on that kind of goes against the grain of what was happening at the time in the coming out of art school, the East Sydney Technical College, and in the 60s, and Anne was using these beautiful colours and wasn't scared of colour. And I think Australian art was very much still in the stages of the browns, and we know what they call it in art history, that 18th century school. Joanna and I were talking last night and about how you actually paint, because this idea of space too. I had in this book there were a few photographs from the studio, and because I've never visited the studio, so I love to know. I will. I love to know how, and I imagine that you work around the canvas and spin it, and from all different. So just walk us through that. Do you paint on an easel or flat?
Yes, both.
Both.
Yes. Um, and so I think, yes, it tells me what it needs, and I can't just do it as well now, but I can pick up a big painting and put it down and then, paint like that and then put it up again. But I've actually got a friend who's an engineer making an easel that goes up, and I can just press a button, it can go up and down, and so on. So I'm adapting again, and I like that. I like to have to sort of work out what to do now that one doesn't do what the same as before, so I think in these new things, these are all new, the works on paper, something different is happening, and my mind has evolved into another form of making art, but I hope it still looks like me.
I think it definitely does. I don't think you need worry. That's definitely there. It's definitely you. And I think it's fascinating looking at the new work. And when we're talking about the dots that have come into it. And you said they've been there all the time. They've just come, there's just more of them.
Yes, because I thought, gosh, maybe I'm copying, maybe someone will think I'm copying Aboriginal art. And you have to be wary of copying people. I just don't want to be seen as copying other artists, but things come through, and I've had just some. One of the great things about being an Australian artist is to be able to go out to Central Australia and Arnhem Land and the Kimberley and look at rock art, and that has been a big influence to me.
Yeah, I think that's quite true, though.
Yes.
I think artists, you absorb. I mean, if you absorb your landscape, you absorb what you're seeing all the time.
But I think the point of that is that I don't think about what I'm doing. It just comes.
Yes.
Because that's the form of my expression, and so you don't have to form the idea first and then do it.
Yeah, you've said. Well, that's what you said to me. You've said that when you're painting, it's really the brush is guiding you rather than you're guiding the brush. You know what you want, and that's sort of interpreted.
How do you mean I know what I want?
Well, you don't know what you want, but you know when it's finished.
Yes.
But so you're automatically, it's automatic. It's coming from within you without you guiding it.
A brush is a wonderful thing, when I turn around, I take the brush that is needed for that particular thing, because I know the character of that brush. It does that, and it'll do that if I go backwards, and then there's a thin one and a long one, and how you break. Something happened to my shoulder in France once, so I couldn't use my right hand, which was trying when I had to drive because the gears were there. But I painted with my left hand, so it's not. So it's knowing how to, handle a brush and things that helps you to make a painting or make a work.
So, Anne, you left Australia in the late 70s to travel. Was that
I did.
the first time? Because
that was the first time because I had been, bringing up children and teaching and painting, and I just hadn't travelled. Most of my contemporaries, as David did, headed off in a big ship to England or to Europe, and there I was still at home. And so this opportunity to apply for a grant at the Cité des Arts in Paris came up, and I won that. And then I kept going back to Paris, and then my agent there got me big spaces to paint, and so it was wonderful being able to work in different places, and working in different places in Australia too, and just. But wherever I am, it's like having a studio and a place to work, But it's different in different places. Has any other artist found that?
Just in terms of when I was counting the years of since you graduated from the East Sydney Technical College, and I think it's 61 years you've had practice, and you had your first exhibition in 64 when you...
Yes. I was pregnant at the time with Kate, and my first exhibition was at Art Gallery, and it was a small gallery then in Liverpool Street in Sydney. And Frank Waters came to my studio and said, "Yes, I'll give you an exhibition." That was very lucky to have that exhibition before I was sort of taken away from constantly painting by having children and being a woman, and then I was able to go back to exhibiting again. I was lucky.
It's something, you know, really extraordinary to think of that practice, and there's just such a coherence in your work, even like the development of it. But I can see that from the early work through to your current work, there's this extraordinary commitment to painting. And, you know, we said Anne is a painter's painter, and she said an artist's artist. But, you know, that it's really about the act of painting. And I reminded her last night that she said, I read this thing in the book where she said she was asked about influences, I think early on in her career in the 60s, and she'd said when she was, possibly it was at art school, sorry Anne, I might be taking liberties, that she has to tell de Kooning to get out of her studio. Out de Kooning, it was something like that.
At this time, I was so influenced by what was happening in America, which was the exciting centre of the art world at that time. And I loved all those artists. But I didn't want to be directly influenced, I suppose, because I wanted to be me. Yeah, even de Kooning was, you know, who I loved, and I can't remember all their names now. Helen Frankenthaler, Joan Mitchell, wonderful artists, breaking new ground. And
extraordinary to think that what was happening here in Australia when you were at art school, and, you know, the debate between figuration and abstractionism that was happening, that was right at the same time that you were in art school in the late 50s.
Yes. Well, Robert Clipple was teaching then, and of course we saw Arthur Boyd and Sidney Nolan, and they were figurative but really taking it somewhere else, you know, not just looking at landscape. And anyway, it was an exciting time, I have to say.
So, you have had some amazing collaborations and mentors, and, you know, like Olsen and also Ian Fairweather. Can you tell us a bit about Ian and spending time with him up on Bribie Island?
We didn't call him Ian. But I went with my husband, Robert Walker, to Bribie Island because he was photographing and intent on documenting Fairweather, and so we used to go there and stay on the island, and then we had to work out how to find Ian Fairweather, and somebody had said there's a big log like a gateway to his hut where he lived, and so we found it, and Robert called out, "Mr. Fairweather," and he came out of his hut, and that was a great moment because I met a truly great Australian artist. We called him Australian now, and so we had many visits to him, and I think that was very lucky for me.
Extraordinary legacy and history there. I mean, that's what's so important of these conversations. They start, and you hear all these stories that we're not really privy to. And the amazing, interconnections between artists and thinkers that has kind of happened in Australia. I was just thinking, Joanna, did you travel with Anne when she went to China to work on the ceramics? Or?
No, I didn't, but I have certainly been to Jingdezhen, which is a fascinating place and has a wonderful history of ceramics. I mean, it's where all the imperial ceramics were made. No, but I've talked to her about it because it's. I just wanted to know her experience. I've seen it from the other side as a sort of visitor looking, but I wanted to know what it was like to work there.
You're not just a visitor looking, you're a Chinese scholar, you know.
Yeah. Well,
but it is fascinating to go into other countries and be able to work and and feel what, you know, how you do things there and how they do things there. It's wonderful. But, you know.
Because they have the traditional kilns are still there, aren't they? That it's still very much what they're producing today. So you learnt from the very oldest the base of the ceramics.
Yes, but you know, in my case, I was just painting on the ceramics, so I could just point at things, and they'd bring them carefully in, and then they'd go to the kilns and. I wanted to do more of that, but I can't.
So there, 2019, just before COVID, that's when you went?
Yes. And and I thought I want to go back there. And anyway.
Your sculpture, that's really interesting, and I don't know if I understand, so I wanted to, I know that when you were young, your father had collected a lot of artefacts, and that had really been a key moment. But going out and finding and recycling something into a sculptural element, how do you draw the parallels between painting and that aspect of your practice?
Yes, I suppose it's painting and making, isn't it? You know, in those days, there was rubbish was much more interesting, and there were things from the past to be found on station properties, and I had huge amounts of things to work with. I just was fascinated with putting things together and making them do something else. And David's better at talking about this than I am.
Oh, I just learned from what practice of other people like yourself.
Yes,
but I'm a great admirer of Ann's sculpture, and really one of the great works in Australian art, I would have thought, is a work of hers called Australia Felix, which was done for the Seville Festival. And that's an immense work. I mean, it's a kind of huge pseudo boat. How many meters high?
11 meters.
11 meters high, made from things that she gathered together to make this work. And I mean, again, when you see these things on the wall, I don't think people realize that Ann has done gigantic works. I mean, that Australia Felix is that. It now exists in boxes and in pieces in Darwin somewhere, but needs, again, to be put together and the sale raised somewhere. But also at the Convention Centre in Sydney, Ann has a huge painting. It must be at least the size of that wall, but bigger, Ann.
5 meters by 4.5, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought, a wall. You know, I'll cover it with it. And great chance.
You know, having a form of art which can be translated from these size canvases to that, and having a kind of confidence in your own gestures to make that is really quite extraordinary. So, I mean, those immense works, one sculpture and one painting, but I mean, there are other ones. That too is sort of part of where we see this work going.
Well, I want to mention that I could not have done that big work without the help of Peter Anderson, who was one of my students and then became my assistant in that, and he knew all about. It was sort of based on ropes and pulleys and things, and he'd sailed across the world. So I was very fortunate having having that help. I wish he was here today, but he's
I
buying
wanted
a
to go
boat.
back to something else, though. I've just been reading Imants Tiller's book of essays, and one of the things he points to there is a piece by Terry Smith. And what he pointed out was that when Australian painters moved towards, say, something like abstraction, they had almost never, ever seen an abstract work produced in the United States or anywhere else. In fact, what they always saw was a photographic version of it. And what that meant was, he calls that the source of a kind of primitivism in Australian painting, that people they saw everything in the flat terms of a photograph. And what those paintings are about is their tactile quality. And, you know, the painter knows that when she's working, but actually people who are looking at it don't always, they're not trained in that kind of tactile approach to painting. I just happen to remember that I did go overseas when I was fairly young. And I went in 1959, and one of the first places I went to in London was the Courtauld. And I saw there for the very, very first time a French Impressionist painting. It was a little Monet, only about that big, and it was a sea scene with waves and things, but it was more like coral. And I just couldn't bear the fact that I couldn't touch it. You know, you have to keep putting notices in front of paintings, do not touch, because what the painting makes the watcher, the observer, want to do, if it's really working, is to feel the texture of the thing. And I think that was a moment for you, Anne, when you would have gone overseas and actually seen paintings like that for the first time, rather than seeing flat versions of them in a photograph. Being in the presence of the painting is absolutely essential. You can't appreciate a painting or see a painting if you're not in the presence of it.
No,
and that was for you a moment, I would have guessed, that actually changed your sense of what those paintings were about in your own later practice.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, to go and see the paintings of the world, you know, because when you travel overseas, you don't just see what's happening in that country now. You see the museums, and we just didn't have a chance to really see paintings here. No. You know, we studied Orpen, that was all in sort of browny sepia colours, and then when an exhibition came here of paintings from the Tate, wasn't it? And we were able to see real paintings, but you know, you can't just do it once. You've got to keep looking.
There was a big exhibition that came in about 1951.
Yes.
And that was really a breakthrough moment in Australian painting.
Wasn't it?
The previous exhibition had come in 1939.
And stayed
and
here.
Almost all the paintings, which were Picasso and Matisse and all the rest of it, were offered to the Australian galleries here.
Yes.
And they said that when we have Rubens on the wall, why would we want to buy, why would we want to invest in this kind of latest rubbish?
Yeah, it was a terrible mistake.
A terrible
mistake, yeah. And they were here for the entire duration of the war.
They got trapped here, and they were here for the whole war, and then they went back to Europe.
Yes. I think one painting was bought. I think Melbourne bought one painting. Yeah, but that was it.
Yeah.
And probably it was something very conventional.
Yes.
But I think actually it's not only just living in Australia that you only look at paintings in books. I think everywhere, in your own country, even though if you're a European you do have more opportunity to go and seeing them, you still look at the books, and in the books you see these tiny little reproductions. You've no idea the size or the strength of anything that you see. And I think even for a non-artist, it's very exciting the first time that you actually see the paintings in real life. And that, as you say, you want to touch them.
Being in the presence of the painting
Yes.
is in all sorts of things. First of all, that's how big the painting is.
Yes.
You know, sometimes you saw, I mean, I knew a Botticelli painting very well. I think it's the Death of Holofernes or something like that. And I had no idea. And when I went and saw it in Florence, it's this big.
Yes.
And I thought, what? You know, and it's how the relationship of your body size to the painting can be very, very important. The fact that you can walk up close and move away from it is important.
Yeah.
The fact of that it is a tactile art, not only a visual art, is sort of important. All of those things.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's what a painter like Anne offers you, is all of those things, that tactile world there. And the further Anne goes on in her career, the more aware she is of those things and exploits them. And that's, you know, that's important.
And
Yeah.
that comes through, yes.
Yeah, the thing that is really striking about these 70s works is the scale, and, you know, having you in this space with them, and I can just see that action of painting. And I mean, you're quite tall as well, that, you know, they perfectly, you know, that it's about your relationship to the canvas. I don't know, that scale is just quite amazing of these works.
Yes.
But also, I was going to say that actually it was also, I'd seen these works, I'd seen photographs of these works, and it somehow, standing beside them and seeing them, there's just a marvellous feeling that you can't get from a I'm in an image.
No, I still like looking at books, don't you?
Oh, I do, yes. I mean, you've got to keep on
You've got to keep looking at books, but the real thing, I'll just tell you about when I first went to Paris and the Louvre. I just went there every day, and that was a sort of novice coming to art in a way. But what I did was go past the Winged Victory and down to look at the Italian Duccio and those people.
Yes.
What was that school called?
Renaissance.
Renaissance.
Well, pre-Renaissance, actually. It's pre-Renaissance.
They were coming out of Renaissance.
Yeah,
yes,
so
definitely it was the coming out of Renaissance that interested me. And so every day I went, and there was this guard there, a young woman, and we'd acknowledge one another. And one day she'd worked out how to say, "I have been here for 8 years and I have never seen anyone looking like you."
Attentively.
For more.
Just thinking of that when you mentioned the Louvre, and I was just, that you walking is so important to you, and swimming. And just thinking of those galleries, the early galleries that were built around that idea of walking as well, like the Louvre with its long galleries of. How important is that in, you know, your daily practice? Like, you have to paint every day. That's what Joanna had said, that you feel compelled to paint every day. So do you walk before you paint, or?
I try to go for a swim every day. I mean, I can't drive now, for instance, so things get interfered with as you get older. But I just met the person who taught me to swim at Queensland University. When I used to visit Queensland, she taught me to swim properly. And so I've got that, and I just love it. I think it helps to walk or swim or do something like that. Maybe. Not everyone does, I don't know. But I felt when you were talking about painting these, doing these paintings, I'm fairly athletic in my way of painting, I suppose.
Well, I was actually going to finish off, and the question that I'm always intrigued in, because we've got these extraordinary writers, and I think you've already touched on it. I was going to ask, what are you reading at the moment? And what are you reading at the moment? So you've kind of said, is there anything else that you, David, reading? have your...
Oh, yeah, look, you don't stop reading. I mostly reread. And I think that's something that happens when you get older. I mean, you need to go back to the books that you think you know, and then you discover you really don't know them, because every reading changes because you're changing.
Yes.
But I mostly reread, and I read a lot of poetry.
Joanna, what are you reading at the moment?
Well, I think I'm always sort of reading several books.
Yeah.
I'm reading a book about geography, about how geography shaped the world, which I find very interesting, and how it's prevented and how it's actually allowed things to happen, to develop, history to develop. And then I'm also reading, out of sheer curiosity, a book called Chums, which is about the Conservative Party in England and how it developed. A lot of them were at Oxford, and how that again shaped what's been happening in England. So two quite different I'm just
books.
Interested in what forms and shapes history. And I've been reading Ann Thomson.
Yes, we've all been reading this book, and it's brilliant. And we must actually, Anne's got a major survey exhibition coming up that opens at the end of the year at the SH Irvine, which is, a really timely exhibition curated by Terence Malone, who wrote this book. Wonderful, amazing. So we're very much looking forward to that, and I understand that Joanna, because one of the questions I suppose as a curator was about your archive, and then I learnt that Joanna is working on Anne's archive, because it's such an important thing when you look at bringing a major exhibition together, and to see how artists have dealt with their work, and also all those bits and paper and photography and things like that. So, yeah, Joanna's working away. How do you, Anne, have you dealt with that on your own in terms of tracing?
No.
Or yeah,
No.
Never.
Joanna said, I'd like to do your archives. And I said, are you mad? And so it's a dreadful mess of things left. No, of course I've collected everything, and in the early days it was slides, and then articles from papers, and all sorts of things have been put to one side for later. And
Yes.
so it's it's somewhere, but not. I can't say I've been efficient in that respect. So it's wonderful to have. I can call you an archivist, I think.
Well, I think it's really just putting it to looking and finding and putting it in an order that makes sense. And I'm enjoying doing it very much indeed. And there was a lady here last night who came up with her scrapbook on Anne. Which was very nice, underarmed. Unfortunately, it didn't have dates on it, but it had. So I will be in touch with her. I photographed quite a bit of it, but I will. I'll be tracing those articles up.
It's like finding clues.
It is like that. I think it's sort of it's a sort of being a minor detective, and one thing leads to another, and then you bump into somebody who mentions, yes, I've got a painting by Anne, so off you go, take a photograph of it, and find out where and how it fits in and what period it is. So it's great fun to do.
And you can find the period, I think, by the work.
Yeah,
That's the work of the 80s, or that's the work of
definitely.
It goes with these works. Or mostly it's where I did them, in which studio, in Piedmont or in Lerida in the country, or in France, or they go back to where they were made. So that and you do know exactly, which makes it much easier for me. I do seem to know that.
You do, yes. I sort of produced this, and where was this, and do know who's got this, and you generally know.
I don't know about who's got it always, but
no, perhaps not that. But
I do,
So I'm having great fun doing that.
But it is good to
digging
have
away.
one's work, and in this exhibition, in a way, it's sort of a mini retrospective, and that it goes through from early to later.
Yeah.
And it's just good to have one's life of work, because that's what to be able to look back at, or for people to look at. And
I think it's very, very important actually to do that. I'm in for history. I'm a researcher, and so I know how important it is for me to go back and find things and to have them well laid out, and not have to spend a lot of time rootling around. I mean, it's become much easier now with the internet, but still, you still need to actually find the source of them.
And yes, what drives you crazy is artists with titles and changing titles.
Yes.
Well, are you one of those artists? You make up the It was that 10 years ago, but we'll...
No. The ones that really drive you mad are the artists who have titles that are that long and make it very difficult. And it means absolutely nothing. You look at the painting and you've got this sort of very long title and you think, how does that relate to the painting that I'm looking? No, with Anne, that isn't the case.
I can completely understand not wanting to give an artwork a title and that it might change in time. Completely, because you don't want to be pinpointed down to. I think that's very important to keep.
I often go to poetry for titles and to David's books, and I had to say, is it all right if I use this? And he kindly said yes, but I think I'm probably should be paying copyright.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that once you didn't have to give a painting a title because the subject of the painting announced its own, thing. But it's with abstract paintings that you give it a title, and I've always been puzzled by that because, painting is its own language, and the way that language itself is privileged seems to me to be. I feel uncomfortable about it. I mean, painting is just itself. It has its own terms and its own rules, and it appeals to something in the original painter, but also to the observer that has nothing to do with language.
No, nothing to do with language.
And we've got to forget language when we look at paintings because they come in a different form.
I think that's absolutely right. And
that's why even sessions like this are kind of not quite comfortable for me.
Well, yes, well, I was just thinking that, and this is not a session to explain about my art. I hate that. I just think it's about how people look at art and how you see art. I just think those people are, if that's helpful, I don't know.
The other thing, too, which worries me is that mostly people have unlearned how actually to look. I mean, when you go to galleries, what you see people mostly doing is looking briefly, a glance at a painting, taking out their mobile phone, taking a picture of it, taking a picture of themselves looking at it. And then they go off. What do they do with it then? They've in fact refused the very thing that the painter has offered them, which is to spend some time allowing this thing to be appreciated with all their senses and all their own sense of space and all the rest of it, and bodily. Don't understand that.
No.
David, that is such a good point, and I'll bring it back to our current exhibition over at QUT that opens on Friday, which is actually called A Matter of Looking. And it's looking at 20th century work from the collection. And as the title suggests, it's just a matter of looking. And whilst institutions have a really important role to play in who they exhibit and how they exhibit, and it's also the audience has a huge power, and that we do need to stop and actually engage and look at art and not constantly ask to kind of what's this about or what, because it is a matter of looking.
Well, I'm really worried about our powers of concentration because I just noticed that, we all pride ourselves on the fact that we can do multitasking. which means if we're not doing 3 things at once, we feel that our time is being misused. And one of the things that kind of encourages that is the media. And on television, you can't listen to the news. You've got to look at the news as well. And there are 3 verbal things going on underneath that. This is complete madness.
Yeah.
But I think also the thing about looking at a painting, which is very important, is, and I think, Anne, you made this point last night, is that the painter has an idea when they paint. It's your painting. It gives you satisfaction. You're pleased with it. Then someone comes along and looks at it and interprets it perhaps in a different way, sees it differently than you have seen it.
Yes, yes. Well, I begin a painting and then it becomes what it is, and then I'm able to look at it, as a finished work, and then maybe I think, oh, I think I'll have to go back and do some more. But it's that engaging in your own work and looking at it and feeling that that painting has arrived, or that work, whatever it is. And what did you say after that?
Well, I'm just saying that you know what the painting is because that's you. But when I come along and look at it, I may see something different in your painting.
And that's good.
Yes, and that is somebody else looking at it will see something else.
Yes, and
that's
what I feel that's so important, that people are able to come with their own feelings, and often people who've looked at paintings a lot, because you improve your vision of looking over time, don't you?
But I'm sure that it's like writing. The painter, things have got into the painting unconsciously.
Yes.
That the painter doesn't know about.
Yes, that's right.
They use their critical eye as well as they can, and they still have missed things that's got into the painting, which a really, really observant person who comes to the painting will see. I say this all the time. Kids will write to me and ask me some question about a book, and I'll say, well, look, the last person to ask is the person who wrote it, because this is the only person who has never read the book. And a really good reader will, in fact, discover things in the book that have got into the book and that make sense, their connections and all the rest of it, that the writer doesn't know about, but which have got into the book by some other capacity in you that's working when you're working at the highest creative level.
Yes,
and the same is true of painting.
Yes. And that's what you people are really good lookers, and it's so important to be able to engage as children can. Children see things in paintings, they see what they see, but it's sort of easy to get into it,
It's really a matter, though, of giving yourself completely either to the reading or to the looking.
Yes, that's what I mean, yes.
All right. Yes. Well, we might finish up now, and because this is a celebration too of your birthday, is it?
Oh, later.
Oh, it was later. Amazing output and career and contribution to Australian art. And yes, I really look forward to seeing the show down at SH Irvine. We've got some of Anne's work in the current exhibition that opens on Friday at the QUT Art Museum, which I would love to.
I must have.
Yes. So thank you for all coming, and thank you, Joanna, David, and particularly Anne.